Who would rule Spain if Princess Leonor stepped aside? Picture the hush inside the royal palace of Madrid just before dawn, when the chandeliers are still glowing and the corridors feel like they are holding their breath, because somewhere behind those walls a single constitutional question is quietly rewriting the future of Spain, and almost nobody outside the corridors of power in Washington, London, Ottawa, Canberra, or Berlin realizes how close it is to becoming real. The question sounds simple, almost harmless, yet it carries the weight of a nation, the next in line. Because if Princess Leonor were ever to step aside, even for a moment, Spain's monarchy would not pause. It would move. It always does. And that movement is what makes this story so powerful, because behind the public image of the crown there is a precise, invisible mechanism designed to protect continuity at all costs. This is not just ceremony, it is the living thread of continuity, and right now it is being quietly tested. The title of this story is not just a curiosity. It is a constitutional reality. Who would rule Spain if Princess Leonor stepped aside is not a rumor, not gossip, but a question already answered by law, by bloodline, and by centuries of institutional memory. And that is where the legacy begins to unfold, because we are about to discover the surprising successor waiting in the wings. In the United States and the United Kingdom, royal succession is followed like a strategic map. In Canada and Australia, it is tied to national identity. In Germany, it is examined through constitutional precision. And in Spain, it is something deeper still, because continuity is not abstract here, it is embodied in visible presence. Every throne has a shadow, and that shadow is the next in line. Behind Princess Leonor, there is already a name, a face, and a future quietly positioned to step forward if history ever demands it. And here comes the first cliffhanger that sends a chill through the palace halls. What if the future of Spain is already standing just one heartbeat away from the throne? Because succession is not an emergency plan. It is the spine of the monarchy. In Spain, the crown is not inherited emotionally. It is inherited legally. The moment Princess Leonor steps aside, whether through abdication, incapacity, or constitutional transition, the line moves instantly, without debate, without delay, without drama on the surface. That is how institutions survive. This is not just ceremony, it is the living thread of continuity. And now the name that would rise into focus is Princess Sofia. Quiet, younger, less visible, yet constitutionally positioned as the next holder of the crown. In Washington, this would be treated as a stability signal. In London, it would feel eerily familiar. In Ottawa and Canberra, it would be seen as proof that monarchy is built for the long game. In Berlin, it would be analyzed as structural resilience. Princess Sofia would not step forward as a replacement. She would step forward as destiny. And here comes the second layer of tension, the one that makes this story far more than a family detail. What happens when the person least prepared by public expectation becomes the most important figure in the nation? Because behind Princess Leonor's public training, there has always been another path unfolding quietly. Princess Sofia has been raised not as a spare, but as a constitutional guarantee. That is how monarchies think. They do not hope for continuity. They build it. This is where the institutions begin to lean in. The military, the judiciary, the parliament, all of them understand that if Princess Leonor steps aside, the crown does not disappear. It simply shifts. National identity is woven into these rituals, and the ritual of succession is the most sacred of all. And now, right around the moment the world would start asking who really holds the future of Spain, the phrase echoes again with a different weight, the next in line. This is not speculation. It is the invisible backbone of governance. Observers in the US and UK frame this moment differently, yet the continuity echoes across continents. Canada and Australia see this gesture as symbolic, but Germany interprets it as constitutional resilience. And inside Spain, it is understood as something even more powerful. The crown never leaves the family, it simply changes hands. Here come the three clues that reveal how prepared this transition already is. The first clue is body language. Watch Princess Sofia in public settings. Not seeking attention, not shrinking from it, standing with the quiet composure of someone who has been trained to step forward without warning. In Washington and London, analysts would call this succession posture. In Berlin, they would call it institutional conditioning. The second clue is media positioning. Spanish royal communications have always included her, subtly, consistently. Not as a backup, but as a visible continuity figure. In Canada and Australia, that messaging would be recognized instantly, because monarchies speak in symbols long before they speak in words. The third clue is protocol. Titles, order of appearance, seating at state events. These are not accidents. National identity is woven into these rituals, and every one of them already points to who would rise next. And now comes the next cliffhanger, the one that makes even seasoned diplomats pause. What if the crown has been preparing for this longer than anyone realizes? Because when Princess Leonor stands in front of the world, Princess Sophia stands just out of frame, already woven into the future. This is not just ceremony, it is the living thread of continuity. Now we reach the midpoint, where the true stakes begin to emerge. If Princess Leonor stepped aside, Spain would not face a crisis. It would face a transformation, one that proves the monarchy is not fragile, but flexible. That is the escalation few people expect. And here is the tease that hangs in the air like electricity. What if this succession would actually strengthen the crown rather than weaken it? A young Princess Sophia stepping forward would signal to the US, the UK, Canada, Australia, and Germany that Spain's monarchy is not dependent on one figure, but on a system designed to outlast every individual. This is not just ceremony, it is the living thread of continuity. And as that realization spreads, another cliffhanger quietly takes shape. What would it mean for Spain's global standing if the world suddenly met a new young queen it never expected? The attention would be instant. The symbolism overwhelming. The legacy undeniable, because we are still discovering the surprising successor waiting in the wings. Diplomacy would not pause. Trade would not stall. Defense commitments would not shift. That is the power of succession. It keeps the machine running while the faces change. And this is where the third cliffhanger rises, right as the story feels settled. What if the quietest royal in the room turns out to be the most consequential? In Berlin, this would be called structural elegance. In London, royal destiny. In Washington, strategic stability. In Ottawa and Canberra, proof that monarchy still understands how to survive modern uncertainty. This is not just ceremony, it is the living thread of continuity. As the world absorbs the idea of Princess Sophia stepping forward, the question of leadership becomes less about age and more about legitimacy. That is where monarchies draw their power. Not from popularity, but from continuity that cannot be voted away. And now, as we approach the final stretch of this story, the phrase returns once more, carrying both mystery and inevitability, the next in line. It no longer sounds like surprise. It sounds like preparation. Because if Princess Leonor ever steps aside, Spain will not be left searching for its future. It will simply reveal it. National identity is woven into these rituals, and the ritual of succession is the most enduring of all. The safe foreshadow whispers through every palace corridor now. This system was built for moments exactly like this. And the final, forward-looking cliffhanger that lingers after the cameras fade is the one that sets the stage for what comes next. If Princess Sophia is already waiting in the wings, how long before the world is forced to truly see her? The thought settles slowly, almost imperceptibly, that a monarchy does not reveal its future in grand announcements, it reveals it in quiet readiness, and inside the Spanish royal household that readiness has been unfolding for years, even while the world's eyes remain fixed on Princess Leonor. In Washington, senior diplomats would describe it as continuity planning. In London, it would feel like the old logic of the crown. In Ottawa and Canberra, it would be understood as institutional insurance. In Berlin, it would be analyzed as constitutional foresight. And inside Spain, it would simply be called stability. This is not just ceremony, it is the living thread of continuity. Because if Princess Leonor ever stepped aside, Princess Sophia would not walk into an empty role. She would step into a structure that already knows her name, her position, her place in the line. That is what makes the phrase so powerful when it is spoken again, softer now, more inevitable, the next in line. It would not be chaos. It would be choreography. Behind the scenes, every ministry, every embassy, every military command would already have contingency folders prepared, not out of fear, but out of discipline. That is how modern monarchies survive. They plan for the unexpected so thoroughly that when it happens, it feels almost calm. And here comes the next quiet cliffhanger, the one that makes this story feel almost unsettling. What if the crown is more prepared for Princess Leonor to step aside than the public ever will be? Because public narratives lag behind institutional reality. The people may still be imagining one queen, while the system is already capable of serving another. National identity is woven into these rituals, and those rituals do not wait for opinion polls. They follow law, tradition, and the invisible rhythm of succession. This is not just ceremony, it is the living thread of continuity. Now imagine the first time Princess Sophia would appear in a role that suddenly carries different weight. A state event, a diplomatic reception, a national ceremony. In the US, UK, Canada, Australia, and Germany, analysts would notice the shift immediately. Not because she said anything different, but because the institution around her would begin to treat her differently. And that is where the tension deepens, because symbols change before people do. This leads us straight into another cliffhanger, the kind that hovers just beyond the edge of the obvious. What if the world starts seeing a new queen before Spain ever announces one? That is how succession quietly begins. Every monarchy understands that legitimacy is not declared, it is absorbed. It settles into the public mind slowly, until one day the new reality feels as natural as the old one once did. And still, the legacy axis keeps pulling us back, because we are discovering the surprising successor waiting in the wings, not through rumors, but through the way the system already leans toward her. This is not just ceremony, it is the living thread of continuity. The closer we look, the clearer it becomes that Princess Sophia is not a distant possibility. She is a present certainty. A living guarantee that the crown will not falter if Princess Leonor steps aside. And as this realization spreads, another question begins to rise, quietly but relentlessly: if the monarchy can shift so seamlessly, what else might it be capable of becoming? That is the tension that carries us forward, beyond this chapter, toward whatever moment might one day force Spain to reveal its next sovereign to the world. There is a strange calm that settles over any institution that knows its own future, and that calm would be felt inside Spain long before the rest of the world ever caught on, because succession is not something the crown improvises, it is something it rehearses in silence. In Washington, analysts would call this structural resilience. In London, royal correspondents would recognize the pattern instantly. In Ottawa and Canberra, it would be seen as proof that monarchy still understands how to survive uncertainty. In Berlin, it would be measured as constitutional strength. This is not just ceremony, it is the living thread of continuity. Princess Sophia would begin to appear more often, not in dramatic ways, but in deliberate ones. Standing beside her sister. Sitting closer during official functions. Being introduced to the same networks of diplomats and advisors. National identity is woven into these rituals, and every small adjustment would be quietly teaching the system who might soon carry its weight. And here comes another cliffhanger, one that slips into the story like a shadow. What if the transition has already begun without anyone daring to name it? Because monarchies do not announce shifts. They let them happen. Behind closed doors, briefings would include her name more frequently. Schedules would be shaped around her availability. Security protocols would be adjusted. In the US and UK, those changes would be detected by professionals who read between the lines. In Canada, Australia, and Germany, the signals would be unmistakable. This is not just ceremony, it is the living thread of continuity. The public might still be speaking about Princess Leonor, but institutions would already be speaking about Princess Sophia. That duality is where the real drama lives. And now the next cliffhanger tightens its grip. What happens when the person everyone is watching is no longer the person the system is preparing? That is the quiet tension that defines succession. It does not explode. It shifts. Slowly. Elegantly. Inevitably. As the world begins to sense that shift, the phrase returns, carrying both curiosity and gravity, the next in line. It no longer sounds like a question. It sounds like a signal. Because when Princess Leonor steps forward, Princess Sophia stands ready. And when Princess Leonor steps aside, Princess Sophia steps into history. National identity is woven into these rituals, and the ritual of succession is the one that never fails. This is not just ceremony, it is the living thread of continuity, and it is pulling Spain toward its next chapter whether anyone is ready or not. By the time the world begins to feel that pull, it is already too late to pretend it is not there, because succession has a way of becoming real before it ever becomes official, and that is when every camera, every diplomat, every analyst in Washington, London, Ottawa, Canberra, and Berlin starts to lean forward just a little more. This is not just ceremony, it is the living thread of continuity. The atmosphere around Princess Sophia would subtly change. The tone of her introductions. The seriousness of her briefings. The way officials look at her when she enters a room. These are the quiet signs that power is shifting, not away from Princess Leonor, but toward the future that stands just beyond her. And here comes the next cliffhanger, the one that makes this story feel almost unreal. What if the monarchy is already living in two timelines at once? One where Princess Leonor is the heir the world knows, and another where Princess Sophia is the sovereign the system is preparing. National identity is woven into these rituals, and in that weaving, both sisters are already part of the same tapestry. One thread shines now, the other is being pulled into place. This is not just ceremony, it is the living thread of continuity. In the US and UK, royal observers would describe this as a dual-track monarchy. In Canada and Australia, it would be seen as quiet succession management. In Germany, it would be called constitutional foresight. And yet, for the public, it would feel like nothing is happening at all. That is the genius of the crown. It moves without making noise. Which brings us to another lingering cliffhanger. What if the day Princess Leonor steps aside feels completely ordinary because the system has already made it so? That is when you realize how deep this preparation goes. Because while the spotlight stays on Princess Leonor, the shadow beside her grows more defined, more ready, more inevitable. And in that shadow stands the surprising successor waiting in the wings. This is not just ceremony, it is the living thread of continuity. As this invisible transition continues, the final shape of Spain's future begins to take form, quietly, patiently, just out of sight of the world that will one day have no choice but to accept it. And when that day finally comes, it will not arrive with chaos or confusion, but with the calm precision of a system that has been preparing for it all along. Because monarchies do not survive by hoping for the future, they survive by rehearsing it. This is not just ceremony, it is the living thread of continuity. If Princess Leonor were ever to step aside, the crown would not hesitate. It would simply turn, and in that movement the world would see what Spain has always known: the monarchy is larger than any single name. In Washington and London, the transition would be framed as stability. In Ottawa and Canberra, as reassurance. In Berlin, as constitutional success. Across every capital that matters, the message would be the same: the crown has not weakened, it has proven itself. And that is why the phrase returns one last time, no longer as surprise, but as recognition, the next in line. It would not feel like a question anymore. It would feel like destiny stepping forward. Because we have been discovering the surprising successor waiting in the wings all along. Not through rumors or speculation, but through the way the system has quietly shaped itself around her. National identity is woven into these rituals, and the ritual of succession is the most enduring of all. This is not just ceremony, it is the living thread of continuity, stretching from the past into the future, carried now by a young royal who has been preparing for a moment she may never have expected, but which the crown has always been ready for. And the forward-looking cliffhanger that remains, echoing softly as the story fades, is the one that leads us into whatever comes next. If Princess Sophia is already standing in position, how close is the world to seeing her truly step into history?